Too small.
Yeah, and so zooming into video a little bit, I think maybe I'll just compare this to kind of images, which is another media format that I think the C2PA initially focused on, right? And I think that was a great decision, right? Like you get kind of the simpler problem solved first, so that then when we move on to video, which is a little more complex, you kind of have some examples to follow, and there's already good practice that's being developed, right? But I think when it comes to video streaming, the really the big issue comes in the fact that video is just a lot more computationally intensive, and it has this time element to it, right? An image is kind of it's one image, and you look at it, and you can look at the provenance of it. You can even kind of have like a little bar that switches that
It's cute,
kind
no?
of blurs the image on one side or another. You can kind of see the before and after of that provenance timeline. But when you have a video, the video itself already
Tiny
has a
bit too much,
timeline.
no?
So when you
But
even
yeah,
think about how
why not?
to visualize or how to represent the provenance information of a piece of video, that starts to become pretty challenging for just people's brains in general, right? And so on top of that, videos can you
Yeah,
can tamper the video
good area.
in just a few seconds in that video. The rest is good. Maybe like at least a couple seconds are tampered, or maybe these like little blocks in these couple seconds were tampered, right? So there are all these. It's just a much more a lot more dimensions to think about, and if we have to assign if I have to sign the video, and we need to carry that information in all the provenance, in within the provenance, and if we need to display it to the user, we need to show the user in a way that actually makes sense and that's easy to digest, right? And that starts to present some challenges. And the other side of it is that
Fireplaces.
when we put a piece of video onto the internet, so to show it to people, it actually goes through many different steps of pre-processing, so that eventually it gets to a web page and video player that shows the video, right? So it's not just like I record a video on my phone and I can just like put it into a player and it will
Too
call it a
far.
day, right? So there's transcoding the video. Sometimes there is cropping the video. Sometimes there is, and then there's delivering the video through a content delivery network, right? So all of these steps would have to also comply with this C2PA standard, right? So that becomes more tools that need to be implemented, and they all need to kind of interoperate with each other, and so that you can have that final experience of the consumer watching a video, having all the appropriate provenance information, and get to make the decision of whether they trust that video or whatever other value that they can get from that provenance information.
Got it. Thanks, Eric. Andy, follow-up question for you. So you spend, I imagine, a lot of time talking to broadcasters who are dealing with, both images and media and video and other media formats. So I'm curious, for those companies who are interested or considering the C2PA and implementation through the CAI, how are they approaching implementing this standard? How do you think they should be approaching this problem? What are some of the first steps that the big broadcasters looking at this problem are thinking about?
Yeah, good question. I think it is. It's a problem where the solution is sort of emergent. So as I myself learn more about all the things that are talked about in the broadcast pipeline in particular, from inception systems to playout systems to broadcast television to digital to analog, a few things have emerged as like kind of cornerstones of accelerating adoption. One is existing standards bodies and standards endorsement bodies like SMPTE, right? There's already a vibrant community around watermarking, time code standards, the whole kind of infrastructure. And this is what standards are for, right? Standards are to enable tools to interoperate. And the less intellectual property you have embedded in a standard, or what sometimes is called hook IP, actually completely free. Like, some history of DRM standards and other things in broadcast, it makes it much easier to adopt. So we've been very deliberate in making sure that this is a W3C standard, open IPR policy kind of spec. So there's no licensing encumbrance, nobody's IP is in there, and there's nobody, patent trolling what's in the C2PA. Second is getting to know those folks in SMPTE. So you see a bunch of people who are motion picture and television engineers in the C2PA convening saying, number one, don't reinvent the wheel. This already exists. Number two, I'll tell you what's not going to work because I'm in the motion picture industry. I work for one of the big broadcasters. And thirdly, having a really healthy respect as a standards body for all the problems and all the workflows that a typical broadcaster of note has, which is they're creating social media cut downs, they're creating marketing material. Some of it is digital, some of it is specifically for social media. Some of it is documentary, news, fictional, television, series. They don't all need provenance, but when it comes to, a TV station or kind of an O&O or a big producer of even fictional television, understanding provenance from the point of view that this came from CNN or the BBC or Fox News is critically important. So there are first steps, and I would call that last mile provenance, which means, as Eric described, signing a file or a stream just before it goes out for broadcast or viewing is a first step. That says nothing of all the provenance from the Sony camera that may have been used to make it, but it's a start. And we know from user research that one of the most important trust signals for media is organizational origin. So if you trust the BBC's or NPR's methods for information integrity and sourcing, and you trust their reporting, a simple trust signal, but critically important like this, verifiably start with this kind of low-hanging fruit of last mile provenance so that understanding who's taking responsibility for the content, who's vouching for it, can make its way to consumers in the near term. And then over the long haul, addressing, as Eric said, all of the interoperability and the tools and there are, hundreds of tools in the broadcast pipeline that range hardware, software, and mobile, making sure that they all can speak the lingua franca of C2PA is something that will take some time, but is moving forward.
Awesome. Andy, would you mind just saying a little bit about the kind of three pillars of the CII implementation with respect to secure metadata, watermarking, and fingerprinting, just to give folks like a bit of a taste of like actually what it would look like to, see that show up in your web browser?
Yeah, great question, and thanks for asking it. This is a question I get asked a lot, which starts with, well, hey, this is just metadata. It's merely metadata. If I take a picture of a picture, commonly known as the rebroadcast problem, or I, record a video off my screen, isn't that a simple way to inadvertently or deliberately remove all of the goodness of C2PA signed metadata? The answer is yeah. There's no metadata that's going to make it across that analog boundary, so to speak. So we have something that we call durable content credentials, specifically to address this problem. Aspects of it are in the standard. I wrote a blog post. I think if you Google durable content credentials, there's a good write-up that will be better than what I'm about to describe. But in short, you take three ways to embody metadata about provenance. They are watermarks, fingerprinting, and cryptographically signed or sealed metadata. Each one on their own has its problems. It has its challenges, right? We know that watermarking can be defeated. Watermarks can be removed. Even the most state-of-the-art watermarks with enough noise and ML and perhaps a state proprietary technologies that are specific to one organization and not open to all organizations. And cryptographic metadata, as I said, is metadata and can be removed inadvertently or deliberately. However, if you put all three of those things together, you get something that's much stronger than each one on its own. Watermarks, for example, steganographic watermarks, by the way, we're not talking about visible watermarks. Hidden watermarks in pixels or frames of video hold very little information. The more information and bandwidth they hold, the more visible they become through noise or different kinds of aberrations that actually impact the viewing experience. So imagine you put an ID into an integer value of some size into a watermark that you can decode with even an open source watermark decoder. That's not a security mechanism. That's a shortcut to say, oh, there should be provenance data here. if it's not embedded and signed and all the hashes match the media, let me go find that data. And you can go find that data in a decentralized way on a blockchain using a smart contract. You can find that metadata in Adobe's Content Credentials Cloud or another organization's Content Credentials Cloud. And then finally, as a last step, to make sure that there's not a security breach between the content that metadata should be attached to and the content that purports to have the watermark, you do a visual or a perceptual check. And these technologies exist for both video, audio, and also images, of course. So now you have the best of all three worlds, which is, you know, the metadata is attached to this media. You have a shortcut decoder in a watermark that survives that analog boundary and the rebroadcast problem. And then you have the robustness and the bandwidth to store lots of details via signed cryptographic metadata, and you inherit the underlying trust model that I described earlier. So that was a lot of technical detail, but effectively, you know, no one of these measures alone is enough to stop bad actors and provide us the security and the confidence in provenance data that all three together provide. So that's been our approach.
Super cool. Really, really awesome to hear you unpack that. The three pillars of content credentials. Eric, I'm wondering if you could let folks know how at LivePeer Studio, which is the video developer toolkit that's been built on top of the LivePeer network, which is also open source developer tooling, how have you been thinking about implementing these standards into your product?
Yeah, for sure. So the mission of LivePeer Studio, or the reason LivePeer Studio exists, is that we want to make that connection between infrastructure or between some theoretical design to the actual users, the actual practitioners in the field, right? We want to create tools that people can touch and use and give feedback on. So, we can improve the tools and, create feedback back to the infrastructure or to the standards. So we've been focused on, identifying some low-hanging fruits and creating